I'm excited to welcome Maurice Ducoing today. He's in Los Angeles, and he is the founder and CEO of Ducoing Human Capital, where he serves as a guide to organizations of all sizes using his 15 plus years of human capital management experience, both operational and consulting. As a guide, Maurice helps organizations tailor traditional and progressive approaches to the people side of business, helping them attain unique solutions grounded in psychological safety and inclusion. Specifically, Maurice is passionate about partnering to upskill people managers in psychological safety, interpersonal change, emotional intelligence, and inclusion, guiding organizations through complex organizational change, particular M&A deals, applying tried and true people-focused tools, supporting executives to align and identify their mission, vision, and values, and generally aid organizations in navigating the DEI and the talent lifecycle. This specialization allows for far deeper work with clients to truly obtain the outcomes that safe and inclusive work cultures provide. Wow, I love it.
What a mouthful.
What a mouthful, but it's so great to have you on, Maurice. Wow.
Good to be here.
And so I think one thing I want to call out, knowing about you is kind of buried it, your 15 years of human capital management experience. A lot of that came from your consultative work with Deloitte and the experiences that you got from so many clients.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Lots of big, and that's, I think, the big difference. The beginning half of my career is really focused on these enterprise-wide clients, right? Really large clients working with departments that after, when I started working in private equity and started working with a lot of those portfolio software companies, the companies in entirety are smaller than some of the departments I used to work with at Deloitte. So it's just it's an interesting sort of turn of events, but I suppose it's better to go that direction, where you start with big and then you start honing in and believing that you have a little bit more impact. You can make actual change and influence a little bit more easily with smaller organizations. And I think that is really valuable to me. And that's actually why I've tried to stay in this area for around the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think again, it's such an interesting time that we're in, pre-COVID or post-COVID world, where people definitely are demanding more of their employers and their managers, and in regards to the DEI, accessibility, and just making it be like we're no longer in the 1920s and 40s where we have to work every day, day in and day out for scraps of pennies, and people are expecting more from their employers. So what is it that you really focus on when you're talking to your clients about upskilling your managers? How do you do that?
I try and break it down for everybody into a thoughtful approach and try and say, okay, what do you really need your managers to be able to do? And that typically can break it down into 3 different areas. They need to have technical skills, i.e. they need to be able to manage the work that in whatever function they happen to be. It could be sales skills, it could be engineering skills, it could be marketing skills or whatever. Then there's what I would call talent skills, in which they need to have and understand how to navigate the talent lifecycle. So from hiring requirements, onboarding, performance management, engagement, employee relations, separations, all those good areas. And then the third, and where I really do spend the majority of my time, is in the leadership component, the leadership skills that they require. And that I try and break down into a very, very specific area, which is, what are the behaviors that you want your managers to use to teach their teams to engage with, to actually engage as a behavior themselves, to engage and encourage one another to use those behaviors. And so what I say, behaviors at an organizational level are typically what your culture is made out of. So I try and say the first and foundational piece and behavior that you always want is psychological safety. Since the Google and Amy Edmondson's work together in Project Aristotle, it was pretty clear that psychological safety is that foundational trait that all teams need in order for them to be high performing. And so with that in mind, I always think that that is the foundational skill that you need so that you can build everything else. The second I always go for is change management. I think our organizations, particularly smaller organizations, startup organizations, they're just ripe with change. They're scaling, they're growing, they're making decisions
Every day.
all the time. They make a decision to make another decision. It's just, there's so many different challenging moments. And so you need to make sure that everybody is able to handle that change. And to me, I see really three elements of that change. There is the change management, the interpersonal change management. How do I get others to trust me through change? Second, the resilience component. When things are going really challengingly, how do I weather the storm? And then third, anti-fragility. How do I engage in an environment and in change management practices, which actually will make me stronger after all of this change hits us? So I think it's really important to work with organizations to identify those areas. I also think it's important that we understand, as you mentioned earlier, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We need to understand all of those particular skills through inclusive leadership. Emotional intelligence, it didn't go away. Rather than it being itself a pillar, I think it is the mortar that holds everything together. If I'm trying to create a safe environment, but I yell at everybody and I have no sense of self-regulation or no sense of self-awareness, it's not going to work. So it does need to be that precept. And the final element that I would say is your values. Every organization has unique values, and all values are we've doubled down on these particular behaviors we want to be exhibited in our company. And so helping them to navigate all of that could be years of training and work and strategy, right? So that's typically how I try and have them think through it. That way they can really identify the most impactful and most important forms of training as well as interventions.
And kind of go back to what you just said a moment ago. I think that what I see a lot happening in startups is, they have limited funds, right? So they're going to probably bring on people who are less experienced, but are hungry to learn and grow and have that experience when they finish with that organization. And so with that, they don't have some of those skill sets that you're talking about. And now all of a sudden, 2 years later, they're still with your company. They're what made your company thrive 2 years ago, but may not be the right people now because you didn't bring in someone like you, or even someone like myself, someone who can help them, coach them, and really bring them to that next level so they can be that manager at the next level in the next life cycle of an organization. I think a lot of times you just kind of like, a startup has a similar mentality as consulting. It's turn and burn. It's fine. I know that I'm not like, this person's not going to last more than 6 months, but they're going to get XYZ done, and that's fine. And we'll find someone else with more experience when we have more revenue come through the door. But if you actually just stop and think about bringing them along with your growth and help growing them a little bit, then you're going to actually be able to have that person there longer, and they're going to know where all the processes are and how they work. And they're going to have that really, what I'm looking for, someone who's going to really be able to be there for the long run.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They'll be retained.
Yeah.
They'll want to stay. They'll be retained in the organization, because there's so many things that you lose when somebody leaves the organization, even things you don't know. It impacts the culture, all of that knowledge, all of the opportunity costs in the meantime that you try and replace them. There are significant costs to you and the organization to have to replace somebody. And we always have to do that. There's always going to be individuals who are just not going to work out, or they move on for whatever reason. But what we're trying to do is minimize that. And if you're not, it's not just not giving them the skills. If you're not also showing them that they're going to grow in that role, they're not going to stay.
Yeah.
As you pointed out, like, people expect more these days. And if you're not going to do it, somebody else is. So the way I try and say it is, I know that particularly at a startup phase, a lot of organizations aren't really thinking about this sort of stuff.
Right.
You don't have to have giant manager training programs. You should not, in fact. That's infrastructure you don't need. But what you should do is identify the behaviors you expect and tell people about it. And tell people how they can,
What a basic concept, right?
and tell people about it. And just
Yeah.
make sure that you're starting early, doing the things that are necessary, like letting people have a voice and participate, letting people have opportunities for growth, and to not that mistakes don't diminish them, because learning, mistakes, failure, these are all very much a part of a startup culture. And if we just ignore that and say, you should never make any mistakes because you need to be perfect, no one's ever going to live up to that. And no one's ever going to.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stress and pressure that actually ends up making the people fail even faster or more spectacularly, right? I have a client CEO who, one of my favorite things he's ever said is that he and the executive team are the ones, they get to create the company that they want to work for.
Yeah.
What does that look like, and what do we want this company to be? And I think that that's, not a lot of people get to sit in that seat and be able to create that. I know when I created my business, my values just really flew right out from me. And I like almost 2 years ago, and I haven't changed one, because it's exactly the center of who I am and who I want my company to be. And so I think it is important when you think about, like, so many founders I talk to are like, oh, well, that's just like, a silly HR company setup thing that you have to do. Like, it doesn't have any value. It doesn't really bring any purpose. I'm like, no, it does. It grounds everyone to what it is to be here working for this company, at this company, and being able to connect to the other people, because you're both, striving to be holding on to this value, to make this value be your everyday conversation. And that's what we need as human nature, is we want to be with like-minded people to some extent, right? I mean, we want to have the diversity and think and differently, but when it comes to the connections, there's reasons why there's sports teams, and there's religious groups, and there's activities, and there's exercise teams, right? Like, I mean, you name it, it's because you want to have that foundation of connection. And that's what values do for business. It brings, I mean, your purpose, your mission and vision, yes, and also your values.
100%. And, part of the reason I spend as much time as I do talking about psychological safety is because it's a very natural, evolutionarily based part of life. Human beings need to be around other people. They need to be around other people so that they can feel safe. They can be a part of the in-group, and they can be insulated against other problems, and they get a support network. Because when they don't, they're in danger. They're not safe. And
I mean, I think about that TV show Alone, right? It's so popular, and that's what it's all about. It's not about people, whether or not you can find food and shelter. These people are amazing. They can do that. It's really, when it comes down to, is, can you outlast the loneliness of being by yourself? And that's what breaks people, because, like you said, we're not made for that. We're made to be connecting with one another and working with each other, whether it's, having fun, doing some volunteer work, or because you're on a bike and you're working on a race together, or whatever it might be, business wise as well. That's who we are as humans.
Well, the psychological definition of loneliness is the difference between the amount of and quality of interactions that I have with people and what I believe I need with people. So if I'm the type of person who is an introvert, I just want to hang out with my 2 friends twice a year, or twice a week, and I get that, I'm not lonely. But if, say, during the pandemic, I'm a busy bee, and I have to go into the office, and I need to talk to 30 different people, and I need to be around here, and I need to see my grandparents, and I see these people, and I need to constantly be surrounded by people, I'm not going to get that. And so I'm going to be lonely. And that loneliness, that disconnect, is going to become toxic. Why? Because I'm going to be stressed by it. I'm going to feel like I'm not supported by my network. And so the bottom line here is, yeah, loneliness is a real problem, but loneliness is based on perception, and it's going to be different for each person. So
it is such a great call out about, it's different for each person. I think one of the things that managers have seen the shift in pre-COVID to post-COVID is that, you used to be managing 20 people, and those people would be managing up to you, right? They would basically figure out how they work for and with the manager. pre-COVID or post-COVID is more the manager is now figuring out, how do I work with each of my 20 people individually?
Yeah.
And how do I interact with them and how do I support them? And you're right, like I'm an introvert. Like I do not want to be around crowds all the time. I do not need to be with people all the time. I definitely want more than 2 times a week with my friends, but but I've never heard that definition in that way. And it makes so much sense because we are different people. We are individuals and we all need different things. And even though you might be in a room of 20 introverts, what those introverts need are all different because we're just who we are as human beings. So really just so in regards to the training that you give and the support you give, is that something else that you call out is like how to really understand and get to know your people as a human being one-on-one, to know that this person, I could leave them alone for 5 days and they would be fine with that because once a week connection with me is more than enough versus this person needs me every hour. Right?
I think your call out earlier, we need to understand our teams as individuals, not just as aggregates of human beings that have been thrown together. Because yes, there is a team element to everything, but we need to know things about each other. If you are anonymous to me, that doesn't mean that I can create connection with you. I'm not going to trust you ultimately when it comes down to it, because I don't know what your motives are or your incentives are. But the more I know about you, the more I understand about you. In particular, the more I understand about your strengths versus your development areas, the more I'm going to be able to value you for your uniqueness. And I'm also going to get a lot more. The research is pretty clear. If you run a strengths-based organization, i.e., you have identified the strengths of each of your employees, and you have them use that as opposed to doing the things that they're not good at, you're going to get exponentially more value, exponentially more performance, more output, and more value on a consistent basis. And people are happier.
Right. 100%. Do what you love, right?
It's
I
a
mean,
win.
I always, when I interview people that come work for me or that, I'm working with, the engagement part, when I'm getting to know people, one of my favorite questions is, what gets you out of bed? What gets you excited? Why would you want to be in this role or being at this company? Like what gets you excited? Because at the end of the day, like, I mean, I don't know, I'm not a morning person. So like when that alarm goes off, it doesn't matter what I'm having to get up for. I'm just like, the alarm's going off. But once I get past that moment, I'm excited to get up and I'm excited to do the things I do for the clients because I'm doing what I love. And, I've fostered that because I have my own business to do that. But in an employment world where you are working with individuals and you're being managed by someone, fostering that is also really helpful and engaging because then what's their skill set, what do they want to focus on, how do they want to grow, what is it that they love doing, and if you can make their world be around that, they're going to just be so engaged and so much happier and be committed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, you asked what are sort of the things that I try and help and advise a lot of our founders and our CEOs to, what should we be developing? And I think you want to create an environment for people where 3 things are done, where people are able to participate. That means they have a voice, that where people are able to learn, and where people are able to be unique and are valued for their uniqueness. And that's 2-part. Their strengths, as I mentioned earlier, but also their identities. And their identities can always be different things. And I'll give you an interesting example. So I have worked with India for many, many years. So I worked with a lot of people who actually worked in Hyderabad, who worked in Bangalore, variety of different cities there. And at some point in time later in the year, there are a lot of Indian holidays. And as a result, a lot of people celebrate them. They go out and they're gone for a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time sometimes. And other people have to pick up the work. That's the way teams work, right? That's the reality of it. And without fail, every manager that I've really worked with that was confronted by that situation would always respond to that by saying, oh, I guess they're going to take, it's the Indian holidays again. They're going to take all of these times out, as opposed to, holy, what is that? Can you explain to us what that is? That way, maybe we can celebrate with you. It doesn't mean we're going to go out, but at least I'll know a little bit more about it. It's
Mhm.
such a missed opportunity to work with that person to celebrate it instead of being kind of bitchy about it. You know,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's just a slip, and it's very human. It's very
Mhm.
human, but we have to not have those unforced errors happen because ultimately that's a microaggression.
Yeah. Well, I think too, if a manager can get to a point where they're being more proactive rather than reactive, then the reason why that they're reacting to that is, most likely it's, oh, now I got to figure out how all this work is going to get done with one or two less people on my team. Instead, you should be proactive in understanding that this is coming, and whether or not the person takes time off, plan for them to take time off or have a conversation. One of the things I encourage all of my clients to do is, around the beginning of quarter two, like April time, start having conversations with your employees. What are your summer plans?
Yeah.
Most some employees will have families and they have kids that are off and they want to go do, Disneyland or Disney World or whatever, right? And then do the same thing, like in the beginning of quarter three. What are your plans for the holidays, right? Who's needing to take Thanksgiving off? Who's needing to take Christmas off? And really have those pre-active, like instead of reactive conversations, so that you can plan for these times when people need to take time off, and then you foster this environment where it's safe to take time off. You encourage time off because you're planning for it.
I could not agree with you more in everything you just said. What I'll add to that is I think this is the whole conversation about mental health.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
we sit around and we prioritize work over sometimes people's actual needs, right? And
Especially in America.
I get it, yes, and I get it. I am in that regard. I have done the all-nighters. I work extremely hard. I've done all of that. But if we take a step back for a minute and we say, okay, if I'm not able to actually handle all of this work because one of my staff is out, then why am I not able to manage expectation about what's getting done? Why is it that I just now have to work for two people? Something seems wrong there to me in terms of the infrastructure around the work, particularly if it's planned. The Dutch, there's very interesting. I was working with a Dutch firm, and one of the things they do is they force everyone to take 2 weeks every year of vacation. And the reason that they're completely out during those 2 weeks isn't just for their mental health, because that's one major area, but it's also to test whether or not they're a single source of failure. Is
Oh.
anyone able to step into that work? And to me, that redundancy is necessary. If you're putting all the burden on one person and no one else can do it, you're in a real dangerous position because, as we said, yes, right now it's a holiday, but what if that person was in a car accident? What if that person, unexpectedly gave birth 2 months early, or left
Or
the
had
organization?
family that needed, to be taken care of unexpectedly, right? Like things happen all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that concept. Well, I was reading an article about how there are companies that are starting, especially with the flexible time off.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. When it first came out, I was like, I'm not a fan because it doesn't really give the right structure to people to really feel empowered to take time off. And
Yeah.
it puts onus on the manager and the company to make sure it happens. And it's failing exactly how I thought it would.
Exactly.
But what I'm seeing now is, how do we keep this? Because employees say they want it. And it's great for the books because there's no liability on your books, right? But make it be where it's an environment where it's encouraged. So what I've been starting to see is that with FTO is a minimum requirement to take like 2 weeks off, for example, like Dutch, right? And I'm like, wow, I really like that concept. If you're going to do something like a flexible time off, add to it that there is a minimum expectation you're going to take at least 2-3 weeks off, and enforce that like you would enforce any other policy.
Again, we're in violent agreement. What I would add to what you're saying there is also just the fact that not all PTO is made equal. It's a fact that it takes you about 5 days to actually decompress so that you can actually start enjoying your vacation. So if you only
I
have a
felt that
5-day vacation,
before.
right? Right?
Yeah.
Right. So if you're only taking 2 days off here or 3 days off here, or even 5 days, you're only beginning to see the benefits of that. So it really is, at a standard, needs to be more than 5 days, between 5 and 10 days, which is around the 2-week threshold of taking
Mhm.
off. We
So what
need,
I hear you saying is what would make it even more beneficial for people is that you have the mandatory minimum, but that comes with a mandatory minimum total duration. Like you could say, we require everyone to take 3 weeks off, and through that process, a minimum of 7 consecutive days, 7 consecutive business days, something like that.
yeah, I think people would be up in arms that we've removed their agency for how they can structure their own holidays. But what I would say is we need to be very aggressive in terms of recommending these sorts of things, and at least having the protections in place from the company side that says, we recommend you do that, and you're not going to get any problem for us. If you decide not to, well, then that's your decision. But we recommend that you do, so that you can get the best health benefits from this.
And then be able to support it when the request comes in, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. Well, I think we went down a rabbit hole of time off, but I think it's so important because,
It's a good, good
it is
rabbit
the
hole.
mental health, being able, especially in a startup world where you're expecting your employees to be wearing multiple hats. It's definitely not typically an environment where it's a 9 to 5 kind of place, right? You're going to be working a little bit longer hours because you're building something from scratch, which is hard to do. So to give that person that time and space to catch their breath and be able to come in even more engaged and energized and revigorated to get going. Like your mind needs that time. If you want to be creative and build something from scratch and do something different, you need to have that mental relaxation moment to be able to get there.
That's why I think when you and I get together, when we do the research to advise our leaders on what they should be doing and what not, it has to be based on something that's real biology and neuroscience. It has to be based on actual something that will matter to human beings, as opposed to being arbitrary. Because I could say, no, it's 4 days. Well, what is that based on? Right?
Yeah.
Instead, we got to focus. Well, what's the actual health benefit? What creates value? What will prevent somebody from having burnout, which is extremely costly to the organization, because it's just basically passive disengagement, and to some extent even active disengagement.
Yeah.
And
Which is even more damaging to your company and the employees that are around that, right? I kind of look at that as like a very disengaged employee is like a rotted fruit on your tree, and the fruit around it will eventually become impacted, whether they're your strongest performers or not. So you really have to be on the lookout for that. Okay, I want to switch gears because you were talking about 4 days. I also read a new article that Portugal is now working towards 4 days. They're like, I don't know, country number 10. I feel like there's a bunch of countries out there that are starting to move towards this. I know Spain was doing a little bit of this testing for the whole year. I'd love to get your thoughts, especially in the scope of, working with your managers and the psychological safety. And I don't know, just your thoughts on a 4-day work week. And if you think we can pull it off as a nation and as a human culture being globally.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of people work 5 days and then they actually work weekends.
Yes.
Right? So like, if those people are going to now work 4 days, they're just going to work 7 days anyway. To me, we have to start at what's the healthy behavior. 4 days where we actually allow them to actually get work done. So what I think needs to happen in parallel to this is that we also have 4 days of meetings, possibly even 3 days where you're allowed to have certain kinds of meetings, and then 1 day for complete work, so that people can actually get work done, so that they don't need to work on the weekends and all of that. I used to work in an environment where I'd have 8 to 10 hours worth of meetings, and then I got my day started. What's that about? What a nightmare, right?
I remember those days.
Like, what's going on in my life right now, right?
Right? It's like 5 o'clock. And you're like, okay, I'm going to start my day now.
Yeah. So, and a lot of sales teams push back, and they're just like, well, Fridays are the day that I actually go get to meet a lot of my, my potential clients and all of that sort of thing. So this would actually inhibit me. In my view, we need to look at the way the company actually works and then adopt the principles which make the most sense based on that culture. So if we find that this company, everyone's working 7 days a week, having a 4-day work week makes no difference unless we take their laptops away, which we're obviously not going to do, right? So instead, what do we do? We need to actually curb when they're going to be influenced by things that they don't need to be influenced by, like pointless meetings, meetings that could have been an email, or just not even attending a lot of those sorts of meetings. That will save them a tremendous amount of time. Actually putting in 2 hours to 3 hours a day of just structured flow work so that they can get into flow and actually produce better and actually have better engagement. I mean, these are practices that need to be in place first before we start playing around with these other things like 2 days off or whatever else. The MIT research that showed that 3 days a week of meetings was the ideal amount that you would have, where the other 2 would be focused on mostly on work. That doesn't, by the way, mean that you can't have an ad hoc meeting one of those other days, or like you are smoked. It just means that you avoid having recurring meetings and you avoid doing them as basic practice. But emergencies, you guys got to do it.
One of my clients, we've been working on meetings, and one of the things that they're on Google Suite, a lot of my clients are on Google Suite. And what I love about the calendar functionality is that you can use the focus time, and you can block chunks of time for focus time. And it's so true. Like if you just are bouncing from meeting to meeting, maybe you have a half an hour between one, like how much work are you really going to be able to get done in a half an hour? Usually maybe you can get like through emails and that's it. Like, and I've tried a couple of different things for myself in regards to how do I actually get to a point where I can produce. And I've been testing this theory of I'm not going to even look at email for the first 6 hours of my day. And I only get to meetings and actually do work. And people know they want to get a hold of me, they're going to Slack. So Slack does distract me a little bit, but for urgent matters. And so I've actually been able to produce a lot more with this mentality of I'm not going to keep letting like an email come through and distract me and I go over to the email. And, I think we have to, as human beings, realize that there are a lot of distractors out there in our business life, in our personal life too, but in the business life that we could actually control. What is in our controllable nature? And that's how am I managing emails? How am I managing Slack or Teams or whatever it is that your business uses, and setting quality chunks of time for you to actually get into that deep thinking. I love it. Well, Maurice, it was such a pleasure talking to you today. I feel like we could probably go on. I kind of feel like we geeked out a little bit about this, but hopefully the listeners are being able to pull a little tidbit here and there. I think the biggest thing that I got out of our conversation was just the importance of really helping managers get to a place that they're creating psychological safety with their direct reports on a one-to-one basis, because that psychological safety may mean something different between all the people that are reporting to you.
Yeah, and making sure that they understand what psychological safety is made of, and making sure that you use your one-on-ones as well as your team meetings to leverage those behaviors in the team experience. And a lot of it is made up of the things we discussed, which is like mental health, just paying attention to whether or not somebody's taking days off. Are we just making sure that everyone else has to take the slack, or am I able to stand up and say, no, we can't get that done on that timeline. We're going to have, this is the way projects work, right? If we don't have the resource, then we're going to have to increase the time. That's just the way life works.
Yes.
So I think we just need to empower managers to do a lot of that. And I encourage our listeners and our leaders and our founders to take a breath and remember that their leadership in this area is going to be really important, because it's going to set the tone for their culture moving forward.
So true. So true. Well, thanks, Maurice. And thanks everyone for listening today. Hope you got some wonderful tidbits out of it, and have a wonderful day.